Howdy! Welcome to our talk show, Innovation Matters. My name is Karok Ray. I'm the director of the Mays Innovation Research Center. Just to remind you, our center is an academic research center here at Texas A&M dedicated to understanding innovation. And today we are delighted to have Dr. Paul Ragsdale here with us today to talk about innovation in really the internal combustion engine and race cars. So Paul, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to visit with us here at Texas A&M, your alma mater. Let's just get right to it. I mean, tell us about what's going on here.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Karok, thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here. Great to be back in Aggie Land, and then to talk about one of my favorite topics, innovation. Obviously, cars are a big one. And so, lifelong car enthusiast. My mother swears my first word was Volkswagen, which it wasn't, but I could pick out the two-stroke Beetle, the original Beetle, when I was too young for most people to be able to do that. So what we have here is, I think, one of the best photos from kind of our last summer, actually, and this is part of our track driving experiences that we offer through RSC Motors. And this is a capability that we're already providing to clients as we're on the path to building a hypercar that will have the highest revving production engine in a road car in history.
Wow. So this is your company.
That's our company.
And tell me, you're offering a service right now?
We are.
Tell me about that service.
We offer what's colloquially called arrive and drive. So clients who have cars like the GT3 RS or a Cayman or a BMW 3 Series who want to get out on track, who want to get faster, who want coaching, mechanical support during the day if something goes wrong. We have those capabilities because we race cars. And so we have a race trailer with all of the equipment and a professional engineer who has won IMSA level competitions.
Awesome. Okay, so just so I understand the business, the client brings the car to the track, and you provide all the support for
so
that.
They roll up, or we actually do store some clients' cars, so they can be professionally maintained on site, and then they show up in their their helmet and racing suit, and off they go without having to think about the tire pressures or the fluids or the brake pads or any of those other sorts of things that can distract from the experience.
Awesome, great. And you're doing this in Virginia?
We're doing it in Virginia at the Virginia International Raceway, legendary road racing course in North America, one of the most challenging, according to Car and Driver, in the whole country. And it's just been a phenomenal community. There is a technology park located just outside the race complex where there are a number of other automotive businesses, and it's just been a great environment to kick off, to make connections with other entrepreneurs in the space, and then of course just a passionate automotive enthusiast base who are there, because VIR is a long way from a lot of different places, and so the people who come to drive these cars are the people who are off the charts gearheads like me.
Right. Awesome. And now tell me your long-term vision for this company that you founded 2 years ago?
2 years ago. Yeah. So the long-term vision is to bring a new hypercar to market, but that's not the end of the story, because if you're going to insert yourself credibly into a conversation with Aston Martin, McLaren, or Ferrari, there's a whole lot more to the customer experience and access, driving experiences, like I said, but then just the day-to-day customer service experience as well. So we're building a luxury hypercar company around this, initial offering, Chimera.
So you're going to build a car?
We're going to build a car.
Wow.
It's completely audacious. I realized that when I set out to do this. And one of the main lines of inspiration was Carroll Shelby. Like, I grew up knowing about the Cobra legend, how he put a racing V8 into a lightweight British sports car and then created a car that made history. And so when I was thinking about how to bring about an experience that was more like old school Formula One in the 90s from when I grew up, the Ayrton Senna era, I started down a path of doing a project to build my own car, and pretty quickly it became apparent a lot of people were excited about this. They were experiencing the same kinds of nostalgia as cars are becoming hybridized, electrified, and turbocharged, and it fundamentally changes the driving experience. And so cars like that you just saw, the GT3 RS, that has a 4-liter engine that revs to 9,000 RPM. That's one of the highest red lines currently on the market. But I wanted to go higher. And so how do we do that? Well, of course, the only solution is build your own car.
Wow. Wow, that's ambitious, but it didn't stop Elon Musk. So
That's true.
so tell us, how is that journey going? The innovation and the creation of a new kind of vehicle.
Amazing. So first of all, I've been prepared for so many roadblocks along the way, and then obviously there are day-to-day impediments in running a business.
Right.
Running a startup is every bit as hard as everybody says it's going to be, and so certainly want to mention that. But in terms of the development, we look back over 2.5 years, going from an idea to finding the design basis engine, to finding a chassis, to finding a gearbox supplier, to finding the engineer who can design it and put it all together. And he's now assembling a prototype race car. So it'll be an open wheel Formula One style race car called an F1000 that will be running in SCCA regional competitions starting April 8th. And then we'll be competing in 3 regional races leading up to the runoffs. And the reason we're doing that, I mean, certainly there's the marketing and outreach aspect, but we need to test this thing in the most extreme conditions, and of course that is motorsport.
And so your objective is to build something that can compete in these races?
For this year,
Right.
we absolutely intend to be competitive, and we will be. But the main thing is to understand the characteristics of the engine. How does it fail? How does it behave? And how do we tune it to get maximum performance? And then for the road experience, you need to tune for drivability. So you want more torque, lower in the rev range, as opposed to necessarily peak power. In the very high reaches. So our car is going to rev to 13,000 RPM. Like I said, will be the highest revving production road car in history. And based on that, though, to have a level of drivability, you do need to be able to have torque and in lower rev ranges. And the amazing thing is with innovation, and I can't get into the secret sauce, but with innovation, you can get both.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But the combination of mechanical capabilities and then sophisticated engine controls. And all of these come from Formula One and from other elite sports car series.
Are you aiming for the retail market in the future?
It is for the retail market. We are going to have an ultra limited run of 76 of these cars. Homologating a car like this for the North American market is very, very challenging. And so it's one of the things that we have puzzled over from the very beginning. One of my first meetings was with the Specialty Equipment Manufacturers Association to understand how do you bring a low volume supercar to market. Right. And found a path forward. That it was something that could be done, but there certainly are challenges. One of the easier ones, surprisingly, is emissions compliance, because that is a matter of engine tuning, which is primarily electronic at this point, and then catalytic converters. So that's relatively straightforward. The federal and then state-by-state regulations around vehicles like this are very complex. But in any case, there's a path forward to do it. I do think, though, the bulk of our sales, the overwhelming majority, will be from clients in other parts of the world, and basically people who are already passionate Formula One enthusiasts. So the UK, Europe, United Arab Emirates, places like that.
And these are all street legal around the world,
legal.
right?
Yeah. Absolutely. So many other countries, in fact, most other countries, have exemptions for low volume manufacturing, and that's been a bit of a political football in the U.S. But I can build a car in my backyard, in my garage, and then register to drive it on the road, so long as the engine is emissions compliant. But the moment I do that as a company and try to sell it to someone, all the regulations that would apply to General Motors or Stellantis or to the Ford Motor Company apply to even a small builder. And so one example of someone doing this right now is Scuderia Cameron Glickenhaus. They're pulling together, I believe it's the SCG 004. They're competing in Le Mans, and they are going through the whole crash testing process and building a car for the North American retail market.
Wow. Okay. So if you were to build this in your backyard, almost very little regulations.
Exactly. As an individual, you can do that. In Virginia, they're called specialty constructed cars, and you go through a process of safety inspections, and then also how was it assembled, what did you do, various inspections, and then after a period of time, they verify that all of that is accurate,
Right.
you get your permit and you can get plates.
But to do it as a company, there's a lot more red tape.
So much more.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
And in fact, that's the reason actually a lot of interesting cars don't come to North America.
Oh,
It's
really?
because the manufacturers, for whatever reason, this has not been a decision that they've made to go through all of those steps to register the car. And they may have comparable crash performance, but if they don't meet the specific regulations in our laws,
Yeah.
and of course it's no different in the European Union. They have their own that you have to meet, but yeah, it's a business decision.
I see. And that maybe that's a way in which the U.S. regulation is in some level it's higher than around the world, and we're losing innovation relative to other countries, right?
I think that's a very fair takeaway.
Wow, it's well. I applaud you for trying to do that. I'll tell you a slight story. When I was in graduate school at Stanford, I had a mechanical engineering professor who was friends with a lot of venture capitalists, and they were all driving expensive cars very fast that he couldn't afford. So he put on top of his behind his Volkswagen Beetle, he attached a jet engine to the back, and he would drive that to school, and he was able to get by because he got stopped by a police officer once, and they said, how is this classified? And he's like, well, technically it has two engines, so it's a hybrid.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, now tell me, this innovation you're doing in low volume, high RPM vehicles, that is a different game than even though you're regulated like the major autos like GM, totally different ballpark.
Absolutely.
Ballgame, right? Yeah. So you're more similar to other luxury car producers? Is that or
Yes.
race cars?
So great question. I mean, even if you look at companies like McLaren and Ferrari,
Yeah.
they're producing thousands of units every year.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
our initial run is going to be 76. And we do have some inklings of additional products we're looking at that will be follow-on to Chimera, which may increase our volume. But for now, we know we're going to be under a 1,000 unit threshold, which is the threshold in the EU right now for a lot of where their compliance starts to take effect.
Right. Okay, excellent. I'm sort of a very, very basic amateur in this space, so pardon my ignorance. But is it true to say that Porsche as a company is one company that's been able to straddle the bridge between racing on one side and then the consumer market on the other?
Absolutely. I think we could absolutely go down the list, but I think Porsche certainly they connect well with drivers, but they also connect well with people who are interested in design.
Yeah.
I mean, in addition to the Porsche. Always mix it up with the car, but the Panorama magazine, which is geared towards enthusiasts. They have another one called Christophorus, which is aimed at style and fashion and watches and architecture and those sorts of things. So they've definitely found something that resonates with actually quite disparate groups of consumers. But then they also bring people together through Porsche Club events, which is of course a wholly separate organization where you'll see someone with what might just look like a beautiful sports car. They're actually learning how to drive it on a skid pad and on a track, and really getting to experience what these machines are all about. I don't see that as much from some of the other marques. I mean, certainly there are track outlets for people who own Lamborghinis and Aston Martins and Ferraris and so on. But I think it's certainly a core part of the Porsche community, which is obviously incredibly important. And in fact, Porsche are going to be at South by Southwest this weekend in a very big way, talking about innovation, talking about actually, I wish I knew what all they were talking about. They've got a cool list of seminars that they're going to be putting on to talk about modern trends, Web3, and so on, and how they interplay with the automotive retail market.
Wow. Okay, great. And so you're hoping that maybe you'll get some retail attention once in 5-10 years from now.
Actually, next year.
Oh, next year. Oh,
so
wow.
yeah,
Great.
so we had this audacious plan to build a hypercar, and
Right.
so one thing that you have to think about in this space is most people who talk about building a sports car, most of those companies go bust. A lot of them have been busted for fraud, and they certainly have defrauded investors. And I'm not going to go down the list of bad acts, even in the fairly recent history, claiming top speed records that could not be verified and that nobody would touch with a 10-foot pole. In any case, there you have to have a foundation of credibility in terms of engineering, but then there's also the credibility you have to establish as a community. You can't just build something and expect people to flock to it.
Right.
People have to be able to understand it, to experience it, and see the excellence that is there. Because otherwise, it's just like, okay, it's essentially it's noise in the market. It's just okay. Here's another sports car. Why is this one interesting?
Yeah.
And then aggressive timeline because of our lean manufacturing model. And again, I'm out of my depth when we start getting into those things.
Yeah.
I'm a geneticist by training, and I think cars are fascinating. But in terms of the engineering and manufacturing, I'm definitely an amateur. And so I can parrot back some of the things that I hear from our technical director, who is doing the design and then the preparation for manufacturing. But what's interesting, and I sort of hesitate to say this, but you look at General Motors, you look at Fiat Chrysler, which is now Stellantis, and just like defense companies, they are system integrators. And so yes, obviously they design products, but in many cases, major components, and in some cases, entire vehicles are being sourced from other entities. And so while I initially thought, well, we're not designing the gearbox, we're not designing this, it's like, well, no, we're providing requirements, and then just like all of the major original equipment manufacturers, we're doing system integration to create a revolutionary product.
Right. Boeing, same way. A lot of businesses.
Exactly. Yeah. Lockheed Martin, and again, Raytheon, and these others who I had exposure to in my career in government science and technology, and that's how you get a product to market in a reasonable time scale.
That's right. Yeah, that's totally consistent with what we've observed, and at least I've observed in innovation in the over the last 50 years. Is this the move towards outsourcing and really system integration and assembly. Yeah. So I guess the big elephant in the room. Internal combustions versus electric. Let's talk about that.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, I'm definitely a supporter of the electric transition. I mean, I think it's completely obvious, and whatever people's takes are on it politically, I think you just look at a dwindling natural resource, and so there will be a point at which that it will not be practical to produce petroleum-based products. In fact, so getting back to Porsche is coming up with synthetic fuel so that they can continue to run internal combustion engines in the future. The Italian government is actually looking to the EU to try to get them to make exemptions for Ferrari and Lamborghini to continue to produce internal combustion engines. But the really big difference, so batteries are just fundamentally different in terms of supplying energy to move a vehicle than cars. So like when your battery drops on a scooter, a car, whatever, the car actually has less performance. That is not true with an internal combustion engine. You've got a fuel source, and it's going to perform just as well, in fact better, because it's got less weight when you have a low tank of fuel. The other thing that I've thought about a lot is the idea of you've got range, but then you've also got the weight penalty because the batteries weigh so much. So, for example, the new Ferrari SF90, phenomenal machine, roughly 900 horsepower, incredible statistics. But the vehicle weighs 4,000 pounds. And so you take a penalty for that mass in every other aspect of driving the vehicle, turning, stopping, certainly accelerating and braking. And you can do a lot of really sophisticated things, and Ferrari and Porsche are brilliant at this in overcoming those inherent weaknesses, but you can't overcome the law of physics. And so while we have the ability to produce internal combustion vehicles, there's definitely a groundswell of people who are interested in riding that wave while it's still a possibility over really a kind of an 8-year time horizon, because that's when the big regulations are starting to clamp down in Europe, and they're going to ban new internal combustion vehicles outright. Now we speculate that there will be certainly a secondary market, but then also people love to drive cars on track now. We expect that will continue, and in the U.S. the rules for running vehicles like this on tracks are quite a bit more open, and so we definitely see potential post 2030 or whatever the date happens to be in the U.S. for vehicles like this for dedicated motorsport, or simply just for enjoying on an off-road environment.
Now, where the technology is in a head-to-head race, best electric versus best internal combustion, who's going to win?
So that's a great question. So it brings up one of my favorite answers is it depends. And so one of the really telling things about electrics, and so in terms of outright performance, I mean, right now, so if you look at Formula One, which is the pinnacle of motor racing, they are turbocharged electric hybrids, and there is a separate series called Formula E, and we use a lot of motorsport analogies. It has less traction, partly because the cars sound funny. People are used to a particular sound and visceral experience, and again, those are things that we're looking to make available in our road car. But the power plants that the Formula One teams have now are just absolutely just phenomenal examples of engineering. But they rev lower. Turbochargers in general have a muffling effect on the sound of a vehicle. They tend to cause the vehicle to, in addition to the limits that have been set by the Formula One governing body, they tend to rev lower anyway. And so, they have fantastic performance, but the driving character changes. I think it's why there are a lot of people who are into classic sports cars anyway, because there's a level of remoteness in driving really any passenger vehicle at this point, and and I've even blogged about this. Porsche have done a phenomenal job at overcoming some of those things, like for example the impact of turbochargers. Like Porsche enthusiasts, were up in arms in the transition from naturally aspirated flat six engines into turbocharged versions, and then with the Boxster, they went one level further. They went from flat sixes to turbo 4 cylinders. But it's also not dissimilar from when they switched from air-cooled engines to water-cooled engines. And a lot of Porsche enthusiasts would tell you that the performance was just so stellar from the change that you adapt with the time. So I definitely see a nearly 100% electric future, absolutely. So huge challenges for that though are just thinking about like road trips. So I go frequently from the DC area where I live and where we're headquartered to the Virginia International Raceway, which is 4 hours each way on a good day. Typically works out to be more like 4.5 or 5. Even with the highest amount of range from passenger vehicles at this point, there isn't any way I can practically make that trip in a day because the amount of time that I would have to charge at VIR to be able to make the trip back, I just wouldn't be able to get there. And so I'm excited about developments in infrastructure so that there are more places to charge, more options for that as well, greater range, higher power density. But then, there are these unexpected or unintended consequences. In the early days of hybrids, people found out that, oh my goodness, these things catch fire and they don't stop. So there were impacts on first responders. Some vehicles have combusted on the street or in various other places, and again they burn for a very long time. Some cases it's days. So those types of things I totally expect will be overcome. One that I'm in terms of being an enthusiast that I'm really interested in is an idea of like, how do you replace the experience of essentially refueling on a track? Can you reduce the mass of the batteries by having fewer of them? If they're hot swappable, well then you could have a pit stop, you could change the batteries, and then the car would go off on their own. I did actually see recently that in China they do have hot swappable batteries for taxis. Drive up into a little station, robot basically pulls your old battery, puts in a new one, and off you go. So I think that's a really interesting, innovative approach for overcoming one of the major limitations, which is mass.
Right. One thing that's I'll tell you, we just did a conference in Fort Worth with so the Texas A&M hosted it, co-sponsored with Hillwood, which is a big real estate developer in Fort Worth, and it was a conference all on mobility and transportation. And one upshot was that the consensus there was that the autonomy and electrification will need to go hand in hand, and that one will not happen without the other. Partly because they, for long-haul trucking, I think it's very hard to imagine autonomous trucks that will then require autonomous diesel gas, whereas swapping out a battery is something robots can do, just like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and thinking about things more broadly in mobility, and I have thought about this a lot in terms of future proofing. Okay, so there are dinosaurs who want to drive on basically remnants of dinosaurs, and then what do you do in the future? Like, how do you? And there's always a space for people to come up with creative ways to enjoy these things. But and then mobility and long distance are some really fascinating things. And I think a lot about like the kind of car that I drive. Like this isn't the kind of car I would drive every day.
Right.
This is the kind of car I would drive for specific purposes, and I love driving on a track, and I'm going to drive a dedicated track car. But like for getting around town, like we just I know it's 2022, and it's kind of a surprise to say we just bought our first plug-in hybrid, but we did, and I absolutely love it.
Yeah. I'll tell you. So back to this topic I mentioned earlier, jet engines. We had a speaker last month. Anyone watching, you can go to our YouTube channel. David Mayman, the founder of Jetpack Aviation, and so he built his first product was a jetpack, literally like a GI Joe jetpack that you can fly, makes you fly. But then his second product is essentially a flying car. It's looks like a jet ski, but it goes up. It can fly. It can go up to 15,000 feet and then fly. Yeah. And I asked him about like the same question, electric versus internal combustion. For the flying car aspect, it turns out that we're nowhere near as close for the energy density for an electric battery that we need to be able to fly for a flying car. So the jet fuel is still way, way more efficient when it comes to that, at least that use case.
Yeah, absolutely. I've talked to, so this is interesting. You think about traffic and barriers. So living in the DC area, obviously one of the most congested metro regions in the country, and I've spent way more time in traffic than I care to remember doing that. And so, the idea of like literally being above it all. So we actually have been working with an air taxi service in the local area to get back and forth to VIR, because 95 is always a challenge. Right. 95 between DC and go up and down the eastern seaboard. But the idea of having, and of course the safety and regulations around this are kind of fascinating. Yeah. But the ability actually not to be in a fixed traffic pattern on the ground to be able to go short distances in the air would be phenomenal. But yeah, talking to the pilots, electric planes they're in testing stages. But yeah, and then again you've got the weight penalty, which is much more profound when you're trying to achieve lift to fly. Can
you share with us some of the main challenges to innovation or obstacles to innovation that you've come across in this project of building a new hypercar, and how you overcame those obstacles?
No, it's a fantastic question. So I think one of the biggest ones, and not picking on regulations specifically, but finding how you can legally and safely put together a product like this was something we had to give a lot of consideration. And the first and foremost is I had to understand what the emissions compliance regulations were going to be. And I cannot tell you how many times people said, oh no, you can't do that, it's prohibitively expensive. Well, it turns out it's not prohibitively expensive. And so that was one of the big takeaways I had from my government career, is in, okay, how do you achieve outcomes basically given the tools that you have at your disposal? And so there are certain fixed constraints, and I think totally separate conversation, we're seeing that with Web3 and crypto, and the big judgment that certain assets were actually considered securities and should have been registered, leading to major fines. So you have to understand how you can do that, without it running afoul of the regulators. Because in our case, we've literally been told that if we do it incorrectly, that our vehicles will be seized by customs and crushed, and so that's not a good long-term strategy. So you start with your fixed constraints, and for me, it's a process of, and this was definitely something that I learned while I was here in graduate school at A&M. I guess I couch it as kind of steeping yourself in the data, or in immersing yourself in the problem, and so that you have sufficient understanding of what you need to overcome to get a particular outcome. Then you look at essentially the landscape of paths that you can take to get there, And then for me, it's a process of reflection. I love this idea of deliberation without attention. There used to be a lot of research in that space. I haven't kept up with it. But I find that, mulling over something, letting it steep, sleeping on it, all of those things are just really helpful to have that flash of, oh my goodness, okay, this is how we solve that particular problem. And in some cases, it's pretty quick. In other cases, for me, it can take months or longer.